Good morning and good afternoon, folks. Welcome to the Large Loss AMA. Super excited to have you here with us today. Well, I'm excited to have about an hour and a half with you guys here today. I'm joined here by Tom McGuire from Large Loss Mastery, and we're here to talk about Large Loss AMA. Thanks to everyone who participated ahead of time and sent us some questions. We got some doozies here for Tom, and excited to get his expertise in this space. But before we get started, I do think it's worthwhile having Tom introduce himself. So we'll start there. Tom, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Dave. It is a pleasure to be here with everybody today, and very honored. I wish I could, wish we were in one room where we could all talk, but this is awesome. My name is Tom McGuire, and if you don't know me, I started in the industry in 1986, and so this will be my 40th year in restoration, and I started purely in restoration as a commercial restore, and fell in love with it like everybody on this call. When you love restoration, you love it. And I never thought that I would be around for 40 years though in the industry, to be perfectly honest. But as I went through my career, it was just like, this is part of me now. And so I figure I got another 10 years, and then I'm going to probably start to slow down a little bit. But this industry has taken me all over the world. I've done commercial projects in Singapore, Kuwait, Mexico, Canada, Costa Rica, the West Indies, the Bahamas, the Virgin Islands, and it has been a blast. Not every job was a lot of fun. But some of them it was more fun to to leave than it was, but to be there. As you know, and some of these projects, they can be miserable, but it's still fun to see, how we can bring all the pieces back together, how we can complete that journey. Because remember, we're always on that journey of taking the client from what it looks like today, what it's going to look like tomorrow, and what it's going to look like when we're done. And it's that journey that is the most fun, to watch your client go from the worst day of their life to where now they're back in business or back in their home. It's a great feeling. And so again, Dave, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here with you all today. Thank you.
Right on. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. So let's get into some of the questions here. So let's start with, there's a theme that we got from a lot of folks who are on this call here today, and it was around how smaller companies can realistically take on larger loss work.
Well, my recommendation to smaller companies when you're looking to get into large loss is get with a strategic partner, someone that needs a first responder. And so you don't have to jump in feet first. You can learn from them by being their first responder and working with them on large loss. For example, if you know of a company, a larger company that is doing business in your region, and you know that they don't have an office, then become a first responder for them in that area, because they always want to expand their footprint without spending any money. And so you can become their first responder. So that's one great way to break into large loss without, number one, spending a lot of money, because you're just networking with a larger company to become their first responder. And when that moment happens, they call you, you go, and then you start to see how everything works. Because the main difference between doing small jobs and big jobs is resources, money, financing, experience, and strategic partners.
In the financing space, some folks perhaps might be curious just on like the cash flow side of things, on what the implications could be or what's required for a large loss. Can you speak to to that side of things?
Well, financing is a big deal. And in our industry, as everybody on this call knows, you know, I always tell people, remember that we're restorers, we're not bankers. And, but how many, I know there's probably 90% of the people on our call today have bankrolled a job to where, we're paying for it until we get paid, which is crazy, but it's our industry and it's where we are. So I always recommend getting money down, and so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But first off, just make sure if you're chasing a big job that you can afford to do a big job, because here in the States we do a lot of catastrophe work where it's that shiny object, that people are chasing, a hurricane. It's like, man, we got to get to Louisiana. We got to get to Florida or Texas. And then they get there and they get a big job and they can't afford to do it. Because remember, if you land, let's say a $500,000 job, your labor on that job is probably going to be about 50 to 75,000 a week. Now you have to be prepared to pay that, because most labor companies aren't going to give you any time on that invoice. It's got to be paid, weekly. And so just remember just things like that. Now the rest of it can be spread out, but just think about that. And on bigger projects, we've been on projects where it's a minimum of 300,000 a week in our labor, just for our labor. And you have to be prepared to pay that weekly, as well as support the team throughout that project. And so finances are vital. And so I always recommend that you put yourself on a schedule. So when you make sure you have money up front, make sure you're asking for money up front. There's an old saying, if you don't ask, you don't get. If you don't ask, you don't get. And it's very true in life as it is in business. And so make sure, and I add another thing to that. If you don't ask, you don't get. And if you don't get, you don't EAT, you don't eat. And so make sure that you are asking for money up front. When you start, it's a tradition number is 25 to 30%. And if it's a large project, if we're on it for 3 weeks, we're going to invoice every 7 to 10 days. And so that way, everybody can get used to what our invoices look like. If there's any questions, we can get it worked out before that last invoice comes in. If you're waiting to invoice till the end, I never recommend that, because usually the end is going to be 30 days after you're done with the job. Now you've delayed your payment now 30 days. So do your progress billing. That last invoice can be a little bit late. That's okay. It's the last invoice. It's one of 5 or one of 4 or whatever it may be. It's not the entire amount. And so make sure we're doing that on our big projects.
Love that, Tom. Like, you got a trademark in there with those acronyms that you were pointing out. Those are great. Love that. Now you talked about strategic
Another
partners.
one.
Another one? Yeah, you got another one? Uh, Too good.
Yeah, this is another one here. What if, how much, how long?
Love it. Love it. Now, you talked about strategic partners being a great avenue, especially as a smaller company, to get into the large loss space. You talked about financing. The other one that comes up quite a bit when you're looking to evaluate your company and your team is the knowledge and expertise in perhaps taking that step from perhaps like more of a residential portfolio to increasing your large loss portfolio. What would you recommend, or what would you recommend to an owner um, to look at to evaluate their team's knowledge and experience? And then if they don't perhaps have it, what would you do to perhaps acquire that knowledge?
Mhm. Well, the key is, and we live in an industry of education where we're constantly being educated and educating. And so back when I started, there were no resources. It was all done in-house. And so it was all done on the job, in-house. And a lot of the standards that we have today came from that. And so came from that, the 80s and 90s when we didn't have standards. That's where they all came from, was all the hard knocks that we went through. And so if you're doing residential projects, if you're doing it right and you're following the standards and you're including the best practices, because it's not all about following the standards, because the client's priorities, the long-term and short-term priorities, are actually more important than the standards. The standards are for us to live by, but what the client is living by is what the need is for their business. What's the short term? They want us. What part of the building do they need so they can keep their business open or that it can stay in their home? Those are the things that we plug into the scope and into the project. So if you're doing a job right on a residential level, then you're probably going to do it right on a commercial level. The only difference is the client. The client obviously is a different client because it's a business client and not as much of an emotional client because you're in their home versus their business. But sometimes that business employs half of the people in that town. And that business it's an emotional thing because everybody in that town has lost their job until you get that business back up. So sometimes they're very, very similar, and sometimes the emotion in business disasters are almost as strong as in the residential. So if you're doing residential right, you're going to do commercial right. The difference is, can you afford the bigger tab? Can you afford covering? Because, we don't like to bankroll jobs, but we might have to bankroll that $1 million job or at least half of it to make sure that we're all right. So you got to make sure that you have cash to do it, cash or credit lines or whatever you need to do the job. And if you don't, find somebody that does, that you can use as a strategic partner to help you through that moment.
Right on. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So for smaller companies looking to take on more large loss work, financing no doubt is important from what I've heard from you,
Yeah.
knowledge and experience, and then looking for a strategic partner to kind of dip your toe in and not take on all the risk from day one.
Yeah.
Another interesting question that I find comes up, less so related to like smaller companies taking on larger loss work, but just the definition of what is considered a large loss. So Tom, in your eyes, like what is considered large loss?
Well, it depends upon who you talk to. Um, it's kind of like that big fish. To some people, big fish is this big. To some people, big fish is a marlin. And so you have in the carrier world, anything really over 50,000 is considered a large loss. Um, in the restorer world, for the bigger companies, it may be, uh, 500,000 and above. For most restores, it's going to be anything that taxes your resources. In other words, it's going to be that project that comes along. It doesn't necessarily have to be a big dollar or, a lot of square footage. It might be that job that comes along. It takes all your resources. You don't have anything left, to do anything more. And then that next job comes along and it's like, dang, now what do we do? And so it can actually be all of the above when it comes to that stuff. And so a large loss typically is going to be considered anything above 50,000. If some of the larger contractors, again, 500, some of the real The real big ones, they'll say, it's 1 million, but it's really 500,000 and above. But they like to separate themselves from the little guys. But really, for anybody, when the job takes all of your resources, takes all of your talent, and gets it in one place, so you can have a $100,000 job that you have to get done over the weekend versus $1 million job, that a drying job where you have 4 technicians out there for a month. Um, Two totally different. Now, one is bigger in dollar value, but that $100,000 job that you have to get done over the weekend or 4 days is much more taxing on your resources to actually get it done. And so it can be more challenging on a $100,000 job than it is on $1 million job.
Makes a lot of sense. Really, really comes down to the nuance and the business and the type of job you're taking on and what your client ultimately wants, right? So that's a great point on resource constraints and so forth. One of the hot topics from some of the questions we received was around consultants, as consultants are generally involved in large loss. What do consultants, I guess where we should start with this conversation around consultants is, what do they typically scrutinize the most?
Well, I'm actually a third party consultant myself. I'm independent though, and I am a restorer at heart. And so when I look at the job, I look at it through the eyes of a restorer. And not all consultants do that. Even the consultants that I grew up with that were restorers now look at the industry and look at projects in a different light than I do. Um, but the number one thing, that the most common problem that happens on all invoices for all restorers when it comes to issues with the invoice is labor, and not understanding how much labor is needed for that particular job. For example, if you have a job, and we'll just say 100,000 square foot hotel, and you have 100 people on that job for 14 days. Someone like me is going to come along and look at your invoice and go, all right, so why did you have 14 people on that job? Here's your production rate. Here's what they were actually producing. They were producing at 60 square feet per person per day. And when you look at the job like that, it's like a lot of times the restorer will be like, well, what are you talking about? Because you're educating them on how they should be looking at the job. Just don't throw all of your resources at the job for sake of a big, nice invoice, because somebody's going to look at it and scrutinize it and ask you why you had that many laborers on the job, and they're going to scrutinize the time on the job. They're going to scrutinize your equipment, all of those things. But it all starts with labor, and it's usually where contractors get in trouble, is there's too much labor. And so always pay attention. There's two numbers to pay attention to on your project. One is square foot. What's your square footage price? And what is your production rate? What is the production rate of your people? If you know those two numbers, you will usually always have the correct amount of people on the job. Now, when you first get started, in the first few days, what I like to call splash day. So on splash day, that very first, 2 or 3 days, you're going to bring in as many people as you can, get all your equipment set up, get everything, all your supplies, everything moved in. But then we want to back off to what we truly need to do the job. Because always remember that it might be the first time that you do that you're doing hospitality, or that you're doing that hotel, but it is not the first time it's ever been done. And all of that data is out there from past performance on jobs. And so you're constantly going to be compared to all the past performers on similar projects. And so that's where that information comes from. That's where our information comes from. And you see the edge, the Encircle edge. That's where it was born, was through data that we gathered over 30 plus years. And we wanted to be able to fine tune how many people we needed on the job. And that's what the edge does for us. It ties all of that in. And then it also tells us what our production rate is or should be on that type of project under those circumstances: fire, water, mold, um, congested facility, whatever it may be. All those factors into what our production rate should be. And so I encourage everybody on this call, if you have any questions about what I'm just talking about right now, because two things: square footage and production rate, then please get a hold of us. We'll gladly give you a demo of the edge, because these are the two things that carriers and consultants look at. The very first thing that I look at when I get a file, if we're doing a file review, is I'm going to do a square footage overall view of that project. So I'm going to take the total project, divide it by the total square feet or square meters. It doesn't matter. Square feet, square meters, it doesn't matter. The edge works either way. So we're going to find out what it should be. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at it and say, all right, so why is this job at $22 a square foot when it should be at $8 a square foot, according to the best practices of the historical data? And so it's very important to remember those two things. Again, square footage and what's your production rate of your people.
Hey, Tom, from that explanation, we had a question come through live around what is a good way to quantify production rate?
Well, what production rate is what one person can produce in an 8-hour period or a shift. And um, so the best way to look at it, let's go back to our hotel example, our hospitality. When we're in the average hotel room in North America is about 300 square feet, and give or take what part of the country, what part of the U.S. you're in, or what province you're in, and the age of the hotel and all of that. So 300 square feet. So think about what it would take for one person in that 300 square feet if they had to clean everything in that 300 square feet. That'd be the walls, ceilings, floors, contents, fixtures. So think about that hotel room, 300 square feet. Now, if one person were to do it, the average production rate, or the sweet spot, is about 140 square feet per person per day. It used to be 150. I've just recently moved that number down to 140 over the last 6 months, because we're actually working slower today than we were in the past. And so 140. So think about that. Here's your hotel room. So 140 to 150. That hotel room, it's probably going to take somebody at least 2 days to clean everything that's in there. Now, if you put two people in there, they get it done in 1 day. So that means that the production rate would be at 140 to 150 for that 300 square foot hotel room. So when you apply that to any project, whether it's a 3,000 square foot home or whether it's a 300,000 square foot building, it all applies exactly the same way. So the number to remember is 140 to 150. That's our sweet spot for our production rate per person, per day, or per shift.
Right on. Thank you, OnePlus, for that question. Really appreciate it. A question came in from Chris. Thanks for that. Was that cleaning correct? What about demolition?
Demo there, it's the same. And so we'll start at 150 with demo, and we'll probably go up a little bit because obviously with demo we're going to be we're going to be demoing, we're going to be tearing it out. It goes out much quicker than it does to clean, and so we will have a higher number. And inside the edge estimating system, you'll be able to adjust for that. But demo is one of the things that will be a little bit higher than cleaning. It requires less labor. So the least amount of labor that we have on the job, our production rate is going to go up. Our square footage number is going to go down.
All right, thanks, Tom. Nate from actually don't know where Nate is from, but question came in from Nate. Thanks, Nate. That's considered for an 8-hour shift. How about on residential applications where drive time cuts into that 8-hour shift? Just divide 140 square feet by 8 for hourly rate.
With your travel time now, if you have a lot of travel time, and travel time also factors into commercial, because sometimes commercial projects we might be staying 2 hours away, and driving into 1 to 2 hours a day, and those jobs are horrible, but they exist. And you get stuck, you get Los Angeles or New York or Boston, you get stuck in some traffic, from hell. Here Orlando or Tampa, same thing. And so travel time does factor in there, with the production rate. It will affect it because obviously you're going to charge for your travel time, but it also depends upon what you have contracted for your travel time. Is your travel time at full rate or is it at half rate? With some carriers, with some uh, uh, consultants, they want you to do it at half rate for your travel time, and so all those things play into it.
Thanks, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
With cat work, shift is possibly a bit higher, looking like 12 to 14 hours. Does your
Mm-hmm.
production rate lessen if that's the case?
It will not significantly, but we all know that when you work 12 hours, you're much more efficient at 8 to 9 hours than you are at 12 hours. At 12 hours, you become kind of a neutral. You're not really, you're getting stuff done, but you're making progress, but you're at a neutral state. Um, Typically, it won't affect it to where you have to adjust it. Now, there may be other things in there. Maybe you have a power situation. Maybe the power is out. You got to use the stairs. All of that stuff will adjust your production rate down. When there's no elevators and you're in a 10-story building. Again, another nightmare. But again, that's what we deal with. But yes, all of those things will adjust our production rate down.
Looks like we have one more question about production rate at this point, and it was around contents packing and pack out. Does the production rate change, or how does it impact if you're doing contents packing and pack out?
We have what we do with pack out in particular, well, specifically, is we have square footage ranges for packing out. And so when you're in the edge, it does affect your production rate. But what we do is we apply a square footage price for moving, for packing out, whether it's congested, heavily congested, hoarder, whatever it may be, affects our square footage price for that actual pack out. And so that's typically what we'll use if we're doing a pack out only. We have square footage prices that are for that. And those square footage prices were given to me by some professional movers and people that's what they do for a living, and they love the system, and so they donated me some information.
Good deal. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate that. Going
Yep.
back to an earlier topic, we had another question come in live when we were talking about qualifiers for large loss. And one of the qualifiers that came up was if it taxes your resources that you
Mhm.
currently have. So, Tom, do you have any guidance for this individual for like any metrics or things to look at to determine where your resource max is when dealing with a large loss so that smaller companies can strategically approach perhaps a certain large loss versus maybe one that might be too big based on their resources?
That's a great question. And it's a hard one to answer though, too, because it is really up to that individual company. Um, One, in how risky you are. Are you risk evasive or are you all in? And so the guys that are more gamblers, they'll take a bigger chance. Um, for the rest of us that don't want to gamble with our business, um, I would look at your finances and decide what you can do. What are do you have credit lines? Do you always have, I would probably use, do you have at least 30% of that project in cash? So if it's $1 million job, do you have, 300,000? In cash that you can use that will get you through it. Um, that's important because you're look if you looked at the project, on a big project, and we're looking to get a minimum of 50%. Then I would recommend that you have 50% to do the job, just as a guide. Now, if you wanted to roll the dice, and you can do that if you're getting money up front, and if you're getting all of your ducks in line, and you're getting your invoices in, and you're invoicing every 7 to 10 days, then you're probably not going to have any issues. But if there's issues on that job and and they're still slow on payment, you want to make sure you at least have your costs covered. So 30 to 50% of the project.
It's a good metric. Thanks, Tom. We had another question come in here, and let me just see. I got to scroll back up a bit. We have someone who's looking for some assistance with consultants, specifically with debris. So they're running into an issue where it looks like they're dumping debris into their own bins and making an invoice from that due to the volume of debris. How would you look at, or like what type of documentation would you like to see to be able to justify the price that they're charging from your point of view, Tom, as a consultant?
As a consultant, and that could vary, and that's, and it's a lot of times, you're dealing with consultants, and it's opinion. And so I'll give you my opinion. My opinion is, if you're doing the work and it's documented and it is true to form, you should be able to charge what your labor rates are, without question. And so it sounds like that if somebody's having an issue with that, and if you're doing the job and you're doing it right, and you're doing the service that the customer needs and is asking for, you should be getting paid for it.
Mhm. Right on. Thanks, Tom. Thanks for the question, Jessica. Appreciate that. A follow-up to the question about taxing, like what type of resources would you need to take on a large loss? Tom, you mentioned kind of a metric of like 25 to 30%. Now they're curious to know, would you recommend putting in the contract a down payment up to that 25 to 30%? And perhaps you can just talk generically to some of the payment best practices. What time, does it make sense to ask for a draw payment early, up
Mhm.
front, um, things like that?
Any big project, there is going to be they're going to expect you to ask for money. Now, if you don't ask for money, they're not going to volunteer it. So again, it goes back to, if you don't ask, you don't get.
Yeah.
And because if you don't ask for money, then they'll just say, "Wow, they don't need it." And and I actually have a client, a large, you know, they do a lot of large projects, and they're like, Tom, man, we just don't want them to think we don't have any money. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You're doing jobs based on you don't want, you're not asking for money because you don't want the client to think you don't have any money. That doesn't make any sense. Everybody has to understand that this is a business, that when they sign your contract, their contract means that they're going to pay you. And inside that contract, it's like if you were to build a house, start to build it, Dave, you're building a house here in Florida.
Yep.
And there isn't a contractor on the planet that's going to build that house for you and finish it, and then you pay him at the end.
No.
Not going to happen. He's going to ask for 50% down, and they're going to call it a draw. In that draw, when he gets to 50%, what's he going to do? He's going to say, "Hey, Dave, we're up on that draw. We're going to need some more money," and you're going to wire him some more money. If you don't wire him any money, then your house in Florida never gets done. And so it's a business, and sometimes in the restoration world, we forget that. We forget because we're worried about getting paid. We're worried about upsetting somebody. We're worried about what the adjuster might think or whatnot. Don't worry about that. It's business. Excuse me. So ask for money up front. Put it in your contract, 20 to 30%. Sorry about that.
No worries. Good deal. Good advice. Thanks for that on the payment side of things. Lorraine, thanks for the question. Dean, thanks for chiming in here. So we have a scenario where looks like Dean might be working 100,000 square foot property with 80 unit apartment building fire where all unit owners needed to evacuate at one point, and now the area is stabilized and made safe for reentry. What strategies, Tom, have you seen or would recommend for managing the entry or reentry of these unit owners, restorers, and professionals in a safe way?
Another good question. Something must have been flying around here.
Yeah, no worries.
Um, Reentry into the building. Now, this is after we're done with the restoration. You really want to be very strategic because everybody wants to get back in all at the same time. And everybody's important. But in those buildings, there are people that think they're more important than other people. And that's the biggest challenge. It's like, okay, what is the priority? What's the priority floors? Who goes in first? Who's second? Set those priorities. Sometimes you might start at the top, work your way down. Sometimes it might be, the people that got the most cachet, who's got the most cash, who's the most important person in the building, all that kind of stuff. But typically, I try not to look at that. I try to keep everybody happy. If you have a VIP in there, get them set to where they're happy, but try and treat everybody the same way and then do it systematically. And put it on a critical path schedule to where they know when their time is to move in, and then stick to it and be ready for any questions or anything that could go wrong. It's very important. I'm a client guy, and so it's very important that you're always listening to what the client's asking for. And it's our goal. It's our mission, and their expectations are usually ways apart. It's our goal to narrow that gap, and we narrow that gap by, all right, so setting up something systematic for how they come back in. Take care of the VIP people and make sure they're happy, but treat everybody like they're a VIP, even though there will be some that will get special treatment just because they are who they are.
Makes sense,
But be
Tom.
very, very, very systematic with it, though. Start at the top, go down, whatever it may be, whatever, but have a system. Don't just, let everybody just show up and start, going in and doing all that kind of stuff. It'll be a nightmare for everybody.
Right on. We had a question come in around equipment, which I think is going to be a bit of a hot topic. What equipment
Mhm.
is needed um, to kind of get into like the large loss, space, and perhaps what do you see is typically owned versus rented? Talk to us generically about equipment, Tom.
My opinion is have your small equipment on site, so on hand, and so the equipment that you can use on any size project. So say residential, commercial, whatever it is. So your small your LGRs, your air movers, your air scrubbers, have all of those in. Your hydroxyls, whatever you're using, but have that equipment on hand, and then have a strategic partner then that has the generators, has the desiccant dehumidifiers, any cooling equipment, chillers, and all that stuff that you need that can bring it in to where you don't have to maintain it, you don't have to buy it up front. Now, when you get bigger, as you grow, you might make some capital investments into equipment that you can maintain. You can have somebody on your staff that maintains them. But if you don't have somebody on staff to maintain your equipment, then we probably shouldn't have that equipment yet. Now, it can happen down the road, but for getting started, just have your LGRs, your air movers, your air scrubbers, and that will work on 90% of the large loss, and then you can always fill in the blank. Say, go back to our hotel, our hospitality deal example. Say we had LGRs throughout the hotel, but we wanted to do maybe 5 to 10,000 square feet of that with a bigger unit, with a desiccant unit. And so we would get a generator and a desiccant unit for maybe the lower level. And then the rest would be all of our smaller equipment. So my advice to smaller companies preparing for large loss is have a good inventory of small equipment, and a good inventory of that might be 2 to 400 air movers, and 100 LGRs, depending upon your size and where you are and the dollar value that you're looking to get into.
Thanks, Tom.
And it doesn't have to be LGR. It can be Phoenix units or whatever. But I don't mean to don't mean to go for one brand over another. So
No worries. We're going back to the payment side of things. We had a couple more questions come through around justifying the draw or deposit on mitigation, specifically when the carrier is involved. Do you have
mhm.
any recommendations on language that you should use to perhaps be more successful in getting a draw deposit on mitigation when a carrier is involved?
When the carrier's involved, I actually like it better when they're involved because you're talking directly to them, and they're expecting you to ask for money up front, and it's expected. I also represent restoration companies that are smaller and haven't done large loss before. And one of our first meeting that we go into with the adjuster is usually about the contract and usually about our rates and everything. And the last conversation that we're going to have is we're requesting 25 to 30% down. And one of the questions that I get almost every time is, "Can we do that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we can do that." They're expecting it. So when you push that contract across and you're asking for 25% down, they know that that's coming. Now they're not going to write you a check right then. It's going to come, a week to 10 days later. So don't count on them giving you, a cash advance or anything like that. They're going to give you your money up front, but it's not going to be that very day. Now, there are some that will do their wire transfer, some ACH bank transfers and stuff that can work on some of the larger projects. Where we're talking $1 million down payment or something. Then a lot of times they'll do that.
Sticking with the payment theme, when it comes to a payment schedule, sounds like this individual bases it on benchmarks that are included in the initial contract. Is there a
Mhm.
scenario where you would not be what it where that it would not be appropriate to follow those benchmarks, or is there a best way to propose the pay schedule other than benchmarks?
You could use benchmarks. I go off of time. And so but you could do the same thing with, it's really the same thing. So, once we finish this much square footage, we get the next payment, or it could be, if we know we're going to be there for 3 or 4 weeks, then, we're going to be invoicing every 7 to 10 days. And we're gonna operate off of that. So whether it's time or whether it's actual physical production, what you've produced, square footage that you produce, it really doesn't matter. It's up to you if you want to use a benchmark of days or if you want to benchmark on actual production. You can do it either way. I've always done the days. After a certain amount of days, you're getting an invoice. And if everybody understands that from the very beginning, because always remember, this is a business. Whoever signs our contract, that's who is paying us, and the contractor and the end user. The contract is never with the carrier, and it's never with the third party consultants. It's always with the end user, the client. And ultimately, that's who's responsible for paying our bill. The carrier will be involved on large projects, and they'll be involved in that meeting. They'll be sitting right beside the client, and it's business. Everybody understands it, and as long as what we're asking for is reasonable, um, 9 times out of 10, there's no issue at all. They shouldn't ever look at you and say that you can't ask for money up front.
We got Phil with a great question. Thanks, Phil, for chiming in. I'm curious on how big the company should be before they take on, let's say, a $250,000 job. Do you have any benchmark or reference for how big the business could or should be, Tom, to take on a $250,000 job?
Well, in my day, back in the day, we were a $10 million company, and so that's not a big company by today's standards, by no means. And we landed the World Trade Center in 2020 in 1993. We were there back in 2001, for under different circumstances. But in 1993, 8.8 million square feet, and that job is still the largest project ever done, and nothing will ever. We did it in 16 days, so we had 4,000 people a day. So to answer the question about, we didn't know that was going to happen, and it was a holy s moment, and 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 it was everything that we could do to put. It cost us $1 million in supplies right up front, and my answer then to the question is, whatever you're comfortable with. At that time, we were a small company compared to the companies of today, but we had a lot of talent, and we believed that we could pull it off. Now, if you believe you can pull it off and you have the resources, then there really isn't a barrier on that entry on what you should, tackle, because that was the largest project ever done, and we were a $10 million company, and so the answer is, if you feel comfortable in that, and knowing that you want 30, 20 to 30%, you want to have that in cash just to cover, your cost on a $100,000 job or $1 million job, whatever it may be. Make sure that you're comfortable with it. If you're comfortable with it and you feel that your team is ready, you feel that your team is experienced, then you can make that judgment decision, which is, it's a business decision that you have to make. And most of us, when you're, in the restoration world, when that job comes around, you want to be ready for that moment, because you don't want to have to turn it down because you're not. And so that's one of the things that, why I'm in, also do training is to get people ready for that moment, for when that day comes and that job lands in your lap, you're just going to look at it and say, we're ready. It's time. And that's one of the biggest things. And so as long as you have, 30 to 20 to 30% of what, that 100,000 is, so that you're covered on your costs, and you have the knowledge and experience to do it, and you feel good about your group, then I would say go for it.
Do you have any tips going back to cost consultants, appraisers, and controllers? Do you get any tips for dealing with folks that try to renegotiate or bend or maybe find loopholes in the original agreement? Sounds like this company's finding that after every new large loss, they're looking to update their large loss agreement, their rate sheets, their conditions, because people are finding new ways of maybe reducing their bill. Do you have any tips there? And perhaps even do we have like examples that we could share maybe as a follow-up, Tom, on what a contract could look like?
Well, every consultant is different. And so when I'm consulting on a project, I'm looking at it through the eyes of the restorer. And sometimes for me, being in the industry as long as I have, I try to, if the contractor needs, some guidance and a little education, so to speak, and here's how you need to approach this. Here's where you need to be. That's the way. That's the best to me. That's the best way to do it. Not everybody's like that. They don't have the experience that someone like I would have. So they just naturally go to where we just want to reduce your invoice for the sake of reducing. And I hate that. And I hate that that's even happening in our industry. But unfortunately, it is. And so my advice is always be prepared to negotiate. Don't pad your bill with things, but what you can do, don't do anything illegal. What you'll do is you can have things in there that you're prepared to negotiate on. It may be, your travel. Maybe you're traveling and you have your travel marked up 20%. And the consultant might say, well, your travel, we'd like to see that as a pass through. So keep that in your pocket as a pass through, knowing that you're going to, if it comes down to negotiating, you'll say, okay, well, we'll do the travel expense as a pass through. That means we won't mark it up. It'll be part of our cost of doing business. And then that gives them something, but have those things in there so that you're always have something to negotiate with. But don't pad your bill thinking that they're going to take 30% of it. Make sure they can justify everything that they're doing by asking them what they're using, what formulas are they, how did they get where they are? What's their square footage number? What's their production rate that they're looking at? And you can start to have an educated conversation, and the edge will help you do that to where it's It's here's how we did it. How'd you get to your number? So if your rates are good, your time is good, and you've got everything documented, that's the main thing is make sure you have everything documented. Make sure your labor, make sure you have your time sheets, make sure you have your sign-in sheets on a daily basis. It's all daily paperwork. Because if you're missing anything, and it's the old saying, if you don't document it, it didn't happen. And that saying has been around since as long as this industry, and it's very true. If you lose a set of timesheets and you don't have them, then you can't prove it. So make sure everything is documented daily and it's double checked and you're ready. Because then somebody to come in and just arbitrarily determine that they're going to lower your bill is they're going to have to prove it. But also, I'm also a negotiator, so I'm one of those people. I believe that I have something else to do. Let's get this done. Let's move on. None of us have an abundance of time on our hand where we're just man, I got so much time on my hands. I just want to argue about bills and all that. No, let's get this done, negotiate it, and move on.
Right on. Great advice. Thanks, Tom. On the topic, though, of documentation, you mentioned how important documentation is to helping
Mhm.
yourself get paid. Is there any um, difference in your eyes, like when it comes to commercial documentation that differs from residential? Like, are there any tips for folks that are perhaps getting into the commercial space on what they should look for documentation or documentation tools?
The best method is always even on your residential projects, do them both the same. Do them both the same where you're backing up everything that you do. Your invoice should represent what you did on the job. Your estimate is what you think you're going to do on the job, but your invoice reflects what you actually did. And that reflection is in your labor sheets, or whatever method you're using, your labor, your time, your labor, your equipment, your supplies and materials, everything that you're doing on that job, you want to document. Do that on your residential job, and you'll do it automatically on the commercial job, and it will go so much smoother. You'll get paid quicker. And I know, Dave, you're going to talk about the Encircle tools that everybody can use to make that happen and make that so much easier. Believe me, I grew up in an age of where everything was written down on paper and it was fax machines and all this nonsense. We have tools today where documentation is so much easier, but we still have the one thing is we don't have enough time. And people are always saying, man, we didn't have we're working 18 hours a day. We don't have enough time. That has been the case for 40 years. And so the tools that we have today are designed to utilize your time, do the paperwork, take the time that it takes to do the data entry. It's easier now than ever, so there's really no excuse. And so make sure we're doing that. If we're doing that on the residential side, then it flows directly into commercial.
Thanks, Tom. I think what Tom and I were hoping to do for the next 30 minutes as we conclude this session is to actually talk through and show you guys some examples of reports that applied to documentation, applied to the ROM tool, and for scoping. We talked a lot about the production rate output, and Tom was talking about some of the production rate calculations. And I think it's worthwhile showing an example of what a ROM and production rate could look like to help you guys deploy some tools that are quite useful in the large loss space.
Mhm.
So what we're going to cover here is we're going to talk through some of the daily field reports and advantages of using daily field reports in the large loss space. We're going to touch on how standardization in reporting to clients that exceeds their expectations helps you win more jobs. It also helps you differentiate from competition. We're going to talk through some of the administrative burdens that are placed on a lot of large loss jobs. As simple as photo documentation and labeling photos can be quite costly, and how you can use technology to automate that process, and then how you can keep all of your teams from field to admin to sales, from the individual who sold the job to the team that's producing the job in sync in real time. We're then going to touch on how to create a defensible ROM. Tom mentioned the edge. That's how Tom and Encircle have partnered over the last couple months. Encircle acquired the edge and are building that into our system. And the edge tool helps produce ROMs in a matter of minutes that are defensible and very applicable to jobs that Tom was talking about, especially that World Trade Center example that I think a few folks were interested to learn more about. And then lastly, we'll talk about how a scope can definitely align to a ROM and how an accurate scope can help produce that invoice that is justifiable and can scale on different types of jobs that you guys are going out and responding to. So what we'll start is we'll go through an example report here where this is a daily field report that a lot of clients in the large loss space that use Encircle look to deploy to show their client any updates that happen from the field to their office, especially if you're dealing with a commercial client that perhaps has a corporate office not located in the region that you're in. It's a great remote tool to share progress. This report is quite small. It's 25 pages long, but a lot of times when I'm dealing with clients, they're talking a couple hundred pages. The table of contents can be navigated through by the end consumer, whether that's the cost consultant or the adjuster or your commercial client. And then any attachments, which could be your moisture reports, could be your equipment reports to justify the equipment you've placed on the job site, or it could also be your scope of work or your ROM so that you're receiving or sending one package to your client as opposed to multiple packages. A few things to note here. Of course, you can take notes. Voice to text is an incredible feature in the field. You can easily speak into your device and have this translated for you. We then can talk through some of the examples that save a lot of time on larger commercial properties, like a floor plan. An example of a floor plan tool that a lot of our customers use for large projects is the floor plan tool in Encircle, where this is an 8,000 square foot building. It took about 13 minutes to scan. So as fast as your team can walk, it's one video. And this can directly import into Xactimate if you're using that tool, but it can also be used as an artifact for your daily field report or perhaps for moisture mapping. The time savings here alone is quite impressive when it comes to 8,000 square feet scanned in 13 minutes. We then can get into some of the photo documentation. Each one of these photos, what I hear from people using us on large loss is that we organize the photos for, in this case, an apartment building where it's organized by unit and room, and all of the photos are easily labeled automatically for you, even if you do export this and send this to a client. So you're not having to label photos. You also can capture photos from multiple sources. So our tool allows for unlimited users, but you can also share with subtrades or temp workers, which is a very interesting use case, especially if we're looking to scale up on the labor side of things. You still want to have folks that are deployed to your job, leveraging a tool to help you capture documentation that backs up your T&M bill. We then can get into the moisture mapping workflows, where oftentimes a lot of commercial restorers are looking to justify equipment and equipment calculations, where the ICRC S500 calculations can help you with that to, again, justify the equipment side of your bill. And cost consultants will definitely be looking for documentation in this space, where we can help you with your dehumidifier calculation, your air mover calculations, and then also provide insight into all of the readings across each drying chamber where you'll see photo proof of each reading. On the last webinar we ran back a couple weeks ago, we talked about some of our AI features. And one of the features we're launching early in 2026 is that when you take a picture of a meter like the one you're seeing here on screen, we'll automatically fill out the temperature and relative humidity so your team doesn't have to worry about entering that data. And when you think about a large commercial loss, I'll leave it to your imagination, but I imagine it's more than just a few readings you're taking. You're taking several hundred readings, which can save a lot of time in the field for your technicians. And then where I'll wrap up on the daily field report is that you can send over, of course, moisture mapping details to show where the water migrated, all the equipment, where the equipment was placed, and all the readings. So really good visual documentation and justification. If you're looking to customize this to meet the needs of your clients, we can accommodate that as well. And where we'll go to next is talking about the ROM tool, which here's a project cost estimate coming from the solution that Tom built with his expertise over the last 25 to 30 years. And this can be included in your daily field report or your first report that you send, combining the Encircle report with the Edge report. So Tom, why don't you take us through this report and the output of what this cost estimate looks like from the ROM tool?
Yes, and so what you're looking at is the cover sheet, and this is a standard time and materials cover sheet. It can also apply to Xactimate. You can use Xactimate rates in here as well as your time and material rates. And so this tool, as it's built, can be used on either commercial or residential projects. And so what you're looking at here is a breakout. Here's your labor summary, your associated project costs, your supplemental items are all in here. And then if you scroll down, Dave, to the next page, here's our breakout. And you'll see up here at the top of the page, we have 100,000 square feet. And you'll see our production rate that we factored on this job was 160 square feet per person per day. By doing that, and Dave, if you look right there at our labor, come down here to supervisor and production labor, those two things are automatically factored the minute we know our working days, the minute we know our square footage, total affected square feet, or square meters, doesn't matter. System works either way. In 160 square feet or square feet per person per day, that determines instantly how many people we need for a baseline for our project. And so then you simply add in labor like we did here. We added in another supervisor, 4 more supervisors, and 5 more laborers. And so you can do that as the estimator. You can come through and you can add as many people as you want. You can also take, zero out people that are automatically calculated in there. It's all up to you. The more you use the system, the better it becomes and the better you become. And so you can just scroll down, Dave, and you'll see, everything that's involved with this job. And so what we did was a few adjusters told us they wanted more detail. And so we started to give more detail to the adjusters and to the client. It's easy to read. So on these 2 pages, you can go through with the client and show them very easily without going through page after page after page of line item. You can show them very easily what the job is going to cost and why. And then down here at the bottom, there's our square footage price down there. Everybody remember the 2 most important numbers are what's your square footage number and what's your production rate number. Your production rate up here at 160. And then down at the bottom, there's our total square footage number at 1360. I can tell you by just looking at this, as an experienced consultant and experienced restorer, there is no problem with this number whatsoever. And
Tom,
that's the beauty. Yeah.
For context, how long would this report take to produce if you were using the Edge?
Well, I depending upon your how skilled you are, but typically this is going to take once you do your damage assessment and you have all your information on the job, this is going to take between 10 and 15 minutes. It's the fastest ROM estimating tool in the industry by far. There is nothing close.
Looks like folks are interested in where we're inputting these numbers. So, Tom, we're going to call an
Mm-hmm.
audible here, and I'm going to open up the Edge and
Yeah,
show folks where we're getting this information from. So here's the
sure.
Edge, folks. If you're looking for more information, happy to get you guys set up on a demonstration, or we have a promo too that I'll talk about in a second. But
Mhm.
here's the Edge tool. So Tom, take us away.
Well, if let's start here and let's enter in our 100,000 square feet. And then let's start, what was our 18 working days, I think is what we had on that example. And
Yep.
then, and then it's at 150 right now, but that's okay. Let's just scroll down and we'll show everybody how instantly it calculated our labor right there. Just go back up, Dave, to our labor. Yeah. And so you can see it's instantly calculated just by plugging in our square footage and our calendar days. It's instantly calculated that we need 4 supervisors and 37 laborers. Now, these are our baselines. And what that means is this is our starting point. So now I'm going to look at that and I'm going to use my experience and say, okay, here's where we're going to add the additional people. And so that's how quickly that works. So if we go, and this is our production rate calculator. And so if we click on hospitality, it's going to give us a starting point at 305. Being slow right now. Might have been open for a while. It might have went to sleep on us, but while I was talking. So do 100,000, 18, and then we'll just put hospitality. There we go. It was just open for a while. So do a fire and water. Do fire and water, and then click on level 3, and then do that's level 3 contaminant level, which is going to be water, smoke, fire. We have a description there. Also content concentration. Go ahead and put that at level 3 also. It's a hotel. It's going to have a lot of stuff. We're going to do 2 to 20. Yep. Elevators. We're going to do the elevators. We're going to click on everything that applies to the job. So it's contents, false air. We're going to do false air. No containment on the job. The containment, this would be for mold and asbestos only, and not a drying chamber. But containment is going to be a room that we're going in and out of PPE, and so we won't do that. Put it in a little demo, and then HVAC. All right, that puts us at 174. Let's live with that, and we'll just plug that in. And now you'll see that it hit. Well, let's go back. We must have an extra 0 in there. Go up to our square footage. Yeah, there we go. I like it. I like those extra zeros. But you can see when you're at 1,000,000 square feet and 18 calendar days, where we're going to need 300 people to do that for our 100,000 in 18 working days. We have 4 and 32, and then we're just simply going to add to that based on our experience. So we're going to add more production labor and or supervisor labor, and we just, then we go down through the whole system and make the adjustments. And so I don't know if you want to go through the whole thing, Dave, or what are your thoughts?
I think that gives people a good idea of how to input the data into the tool. And a lot of the insight that Tom was talking about is in that advanced calculator, and then you're able to change the job as you see
Yep.
fit to produce a result that works for your business. The
Yep.
only thing I'll note that I think is worthwhile, Tom, that you're big on is there's an estimate range that folks can leverage as the
Mhm.
ROM tool is an estimate before the job
Mhm.
starts. So you're able to throw in 5, 10%. I think, Tom, you're a big 10 and 10 guy. So
Yep.
generally 10 and 10 on the low and high end, which gives you a little bit of wiggle room to play with the job depending on how it actually progresses.
Yes. Now, what we didn't plug in, but you can see just by where we're at there, Dave, how
Mhm.
quickly it calculates our first number. Now, I can look at that $5 a square foot number and I can tell you we're not going to do this job for $5 a square foot. But that's just because we haven't gone back and added in our subcontractors and all of that. And
Right.
so, but you can see how quickly this system works. And always when you're estimating, get used to giving a range. Say, okay, here on the low end, here's where we're going to, on the high end, here's where we're going to be. Because it's restoration. There isn't anything perfect in what we do. So we're going to be in this range. So if we get everybody on board with that from the very beginning, then typically there aren't any issues. Now, if you have somebody they want a specific number, then you'll give them the number that's right in the middle. So you'll have your low, high, and your middle number, and that will be the number that you'll give them. That way, you have lots of wiggle room. The last thing that we want to do is estimated project where we have no wiggle room for anything to go wrong. And so we don't want to estimate projects like that. I'm here on the Space Coast in Florida. NASA is about 10 miles away. In SpaceX, they don't do anything, they keep everything in a range and they have to do it that way. Even with them, they're not always dialed into complete specifics until they get up to launch. Even the launch window is always a range.
One question that came in, Tom, as we were going through the input is, does the Edge
Mhm.
use estimate pricing in specific areas or, via specific insurance companies, or is it my own pricing that I can upload into the system?
It's your own pricing. So if you go back up to labor, Dave, and right there, these are going to be your prices. And you can see the prices that we have, and these are just for demo. Your project manager rate's going to be higher. You're going to have whatever rates that you're using, either from your time and materials contract or from Exactimate. So when we say that, it doesn't matter what part of the world you're in or what region you're in, because you're using your prices. So if you're in New York City and you're saying, "Well, man, our prices are so much higher than anywhere else," doesn't matter. You're plugging in your numbers in here, not ours. And so we have numbers in here as a default. Um, and so, it's all based on what you charge. And you can use Exactimate rates or you can use your time and material rates. It doesn't matter. It's up to you.
Going down to the estimated range at the high level, question came
Mhm.
in around should you set the high end as your not to exceed based on the current known scope?
That could be a very good way to do it, and good way to look at it is that high number, and you could use that as your not to exceed, and then the carrier or the adjuster or consultant then would set their reserves then at that plus what they feel comfortable with, because the adjuster is always going to take your number and then they're going to add 20% to it or whatever for their reserve, for their budget reserve. And so they never want to find out that you went over their budget reserve. And so it's very important that we're always communicating where the job is at all times so that nobody is surprised by our invoice. And so, because what we give them at the beginning, we want to make sure that we're as close as we can get. Typically, with this system, we're within 10% almost every time.
Thanks, Tom. Quick,
Yep.
slow, fast input to get to the output that we were just showing a minute ago here, which is that two-page report that provides quite a good amount of summary for the cost consultant or investor to review on uh, the initial onset
Yes.
of.
And
Dave, you
just think about your client though too, Dave, because it's like, the client, when you sit down with an Exactimate, not to bash on Exactimate, I mean, it's a great tool, but it's not user friendly for somebody who doesn't understand what they're looking at. For, the homeowner or the business owner, they'll look at it and go, what is this? What does this mean? But with this tool, it breaks it out very simply to where it's not rocket science. It's, here's what it expected breakout to be. And so it really works out very, very well.
right on. Thanks, Gary, for the question on the not to exceed on current scope. And speaking of scope, the last thing that we wanted to just show off, and if people are interested to learn more, happy to set up a demonstration. But here's an example of a mitigation scope. We talked at a previous webinar or two about our new AI scoping tool, and this was produced from photos, videos, and a sketch. So lots of detail provided from visual documentation that is going to significantly speed up the scoping process, but then also improve the level of completeness and accuracy of that scope. So think about the opportunity to merge the ROM tool, which is producing an estimate for your team up front, with a very detailed scope of work to back up said estimate. So I won't go through this in a ton of detail as we're running close on time here, but I did think that it was worthwhile sharing that, this is coming from, like I said, in some cases, a handful of photos, a video, and a sketch. So lots of detail that we can extract from our AI scope model that would be broken down in project tasks per room with summaries of the damage, square footage, volume calculations, affected materials. And you'll see much of the same as I continue to scroll through.
That's awesome, Dave.
Right on. Well, thanks everyone for your time. Really appreciate the hour and a half here. Hopefully, you guys got a lot of value out of the large loss AMA. If you did, we're happy to run another one of these. Please take a look at the Edge tool. Please take a look at Tom's training. Thanks again for your time, everyone. Really appreciate it and hope to see you on the next webinar. If I don't talk to you before the holidays, happy holidays, folks. Enjoy it with your loved ones. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Dave. It was a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.